came from all over the world: Australia, the United States, the UK, Germany, China. Tourists in search of something extraordinary. An active volcano. An island unlike any other. A rare chance to step into the mouth of the earth itself. No fences, no warnings. Just an adventure. But on December 9th, 2019, that dream turned into something else. With little to no warning, the very ground beneath their feet exploded, ripping the sky apart and burying dozens of innocent people in a hellish nightmare of steam, ash, and fire. By the end of the day, 22 lives were lost, many more were burned beyond recognition, and New Zealand would never be the same. This is the true story of the White Island volcano disaster, a tragedy that unfolded in real time, caught on camera, and one of the most devastating tourist incidents in recent history. Welcome back to Deadly Destinations. White Island, or Wakaari, its Maori name, sits 48 kilometers off the east coast of New Zealand's North Island. From the sky, it's beautiful. A pale green volcano rising from the Pacific. Plumes of steam are always drifting from its craters. But don't let the beauty fool you. Wakaari is New Zealand's most active volcano. It has erupted dozens of times since it was first observed in the 1800s, sometimes without warning. Still, for decades, tour companies offered boat and helicopter trips to the island. Tourists could walk along its lunar landscape, get close to bubbling mud pits, and even peer inside the main crater itself. It was marketed as safe, as long as people followed the rules. Tour guides wore gas masks, hard hats were required, and the tours were always brief, just under 2 hours on the island. But there was one problem. Wakaari was an unpredictable killer, and there was no real emergency plan in place. Leading up to December 2019, volcanologists were paying close attention to White Island. In early November, just 1 month before the disaster, the volcanic alert level was raised from level 1 to level 2, a warning that minor eruptive activity was possible. Volcanologists noted increased seismic activity, higher gas levels, and more heat at the surface. But level 2 didn't mean do not enter. It wasn't legally enforceable. In fact, it had been level 2 many times before without incident. So tours continued. And on December 9th, 2019, 2 groups were scheduled to visit. One group would arrive by boat, operated by White Island Tours. The other would fly in by helicopter. In total, there were 47 people on or near the island at the time of the eruption. Many were from the cruise ship Ovation of the Seas, docked in the nearby Bay of Plenty. They thought they were in for a scenic adventure. Instead, they walked into a death trap. 2:11 p.m. Without warning, White Island erupted violently. A massive plume of ash, rock, and superheated steam exploded more than 12,000 feet into the sky. Those closest to the crater had seconds, just seconds to react. There was no siren, no time to flee, no shelter. The eruption created a deadly pyroclastic surge, a wave of scorching gas and volcanic ash traveling over 100 kilometers per hour. People on the island were instantly engulfed in a thick black cloud. Visibility dropped to 0. The air became impossible to breathe. Temperatures soared past 300 degrees Celsius, 572 degrees Fahrenheit. One survivor described it as being hit by a freight train made of fire and acid. The ash tore through clothing, melted shoes, and scorched exposed skin in seconds. Many victims lost their ability to breathe or scream. Those who weren't killed outright were left critically burned, some with burns over 90% of their bodies. Tour guides and survivors scrambled to help. Some tourists dove behind rocks. Others tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. On the edge of the island, the boat crew, who had stayed offshore, watched helplessly as the sky turned black. Several of the company's own tour guides were on the island. Others were in small boats or helicopters nearby. One guide, Hayden Marshall Inman, was later hailed a hero. He died trying to help others escape. Minutes after the eruption, a debate began. Should anyone attempt a rescue? The New Zealand government initially said it was too dangerous to send emergency crews onto the island. But then, something remarkable happened. Civilian pilots took matters into their own hands. Helicopter pilots who had earlier dropped off tourists flew back into the ash cloud, risking their lives to retrieve the wounded. They landed blindly, guided only by instinct and partial GPS. One pilot, Mark Law, helped evacuate over a dozen survivors, many of whom were unconscious or barely clinging to life. "We didn't think, we just went," one pilot said later. "They were burning alive. We had to do something." But the scene was apocalyptic. Burn victims lay in the ash, unable to move. Some were missing limbs. Others were so badly injured, their own family members didn't recognize them. In the hours that followed, hospitals across New Zealand went into emergency mode. More than 20 survivors were airlifted, many in critical condition. Burn units were overwhelmed. Doctors worked around the clock. A special stockpile of skin for grafting had to be flown in from Australia and the United States. But for many, it wasn't enough. In the days that followed, 22 people died. Some died on the island. Others succumbed to their injuries in hospitals after weeks of intensive care. The victims included Julie and Jessica Richards, a mother and daughter from Brisbane; Crystal Browett, an Australian teenager celebrating her birthday; Tipene Mangi, a young Maori tour guide; and several members of the same American and New Zealand families. Others who survived were left permanently disfigured. Many required dozens of surgeries, amputations, and long-term rehabilitation. One survivor, Stephanie Browett, later spoke publicly about the pain of losing her sister and father in the eruption, and about the physical and emotional scars that will never heal. In the months that followed, public outrage erupted alongside the volcano. Why were tourists allowed on an active volcano with no real emergency plan? The answer came down to money, complacency, and legal gray areas. White Island Tours had been running excursions for years, even during elevated volcanic alerts. The tour company argued they were following guidelines. The government said there was no law preventing it. But for families who lost loved ones, it felt like a betrayal. In November 2020, New Zealand's workplace safety regulator, WorkSafe, filed charges against 13 parties, including White Island Tours, helicopter companies, scientific monitoring agencies, the island's owners. These charges centered on failing to ensure the health and safety of workers and tourists. By 2023, some companies had pleaded guilty. Others continued to fight the charges. But the central issue remained. Was this tragedy preventable? Many experts say yes. There were signs. There were warnings. There had even been simulations of what an eruption would look like, years before it happened. But no one had imagined it would happen while tourists were there. Today, no one is allowed on White Island. Tourist operations have ceased. The island remains active, still billowing steam into the sky. From a distance, it looks peaceful again. But for those who were there, or who lost someone that day, the trauma is still raw. Some survivors now advocate for safer tourism practices, warning others that just because a tour is legal doesn't mean it's safe. One survivor said, "It felt like we were being offered up to the volcano. We travel the world in search of wonder, beauty, adventure. But sometimes that beauty hides danger, and the very thing that draws us in is what destroys us." The eruption at White Island was not a freak accident. It was a predictable tragedy, and a brutal reminder that nature does not care about schedules, selfies, or sightseeing. 22 people left for a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Only some came back, and all of them were changed forever. This was the story of the White Island eruption, one of the most horrifying tourist disasters in modern history. You've been watching Deadly Destinations. If you found this story chilling or eye-opening, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more real-life vacation tragedies from around the world. And remember, not all who wander are lost, but some never return.